This is a packed panel today, and what's really neat about it is because it is so jammed, we've got an awful lot of topics that we're going to be able to cover. We're going to be able to cover the topics of smart communities and smart cities and development. Then we're going to hear from two providers who offer broadband service in tribal lands and talk about the challenges and the opportunities in Indian country. And then we have a number of representatives from federal agencies, including Department of Agriculture, the EDA, Economic Development Administration, Comptroller of the Currency. We have David Corman from NSF. And also we have Sarah Ballou from NTIA, who are going to talk about all the different federal programs for funding. And again, the linkage there, of course, is that those programs will provide funding for Indian country, for tribal reservations, but also to develop the infrastructure and the backbone to get these smart communities put together. In order to give everyone enough time, the way that we've broken out this panel, which by my count has 8 panelists over the next 2 hours, is roughly 8 to 10 minutes per presenter to share their unique perspective. Time permitting, I might ask those panelists after every 2 or 3, just a couple of follow-up questions. But the goal is that at the end of all the panelists' presentations, we will still have a good 30 minutes at least for Q&A and interaction with the audience and also from our remote participants. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to David. Okay, with the same advice that you have to hold this pretty much against your esophagus.
Thanks. And Troy, can you help pull up my slides? So I'd like to welcome everybody again on behalf of Purdue and the Purdue Research Foundation. I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors and all the people that made this work. My colleague and partner in crime over here, Troy Heggie, really deserves a lot of credit. I think that, you know, when you plan a great meal, you got a lot of chefs who are planning all the different courses, but at some point, somebody got to be the cook and the sous chef and everything else. And I know that Troy did a lot of heavy lifting there. So Troy, thank you very, very much for your help. So I have the best job, I think, of anybody, maybe besides Mitch Daniels and the Purdue ecosystem here. As I said, I'm the Chief Innovation Collaboration Officer for what's called the Purdue Research Foundation. We are not part of the academy. So it means we don't have a teaching mission. Very few, I'm trying to think of the 50 plus people in the foundation. None of us are academics. We all are either scientists, engineers, business people. I happen to be all 3 of those based on my experiences. And our goal is really to advance the mission of the university with the assets that are sort of under our control and management. One of those big assets is land. We also manage the IP portfolio for the university. We also manage the endowment. So when you think about land, and that's really what I'm going to talk about here, and I set the stage with what I'm going to say here, we have a very unique governance structure for what's about ready to be built here in the 400 acres. Literally, if you're facing me, to your left, behind you and to your left is 400 acres. And you kind of see the map. And Dean Chang talked a little bit about this. But this is State Street, and Mayor Dennis mentioned this. The State Street Road project is really what enabled all of this. And so, whoops, they took the one reference I was now going to make to the slide. But right down the middle of this, so you see State Street essentially bisecting the slide. That used to be a state highway, used to be, semi-tractor trailers going literally right down the middle of campus. And to the top and to the right of that chart is really the academic campus. And all of the things that you see in color, green, gold, whatever, that's all under the control of Purdue Research Foundation. So we govern all 400 acres. And you can see with the State Street project, which was a $150 million project, infrastructure project, to sort of reroute traffic around this place, it's now opened this up for some very, very unique development. And you can see on this different areas, different zones. On the far left, you see our aerospace district. It's not necessarily exclusive to aerospace, but that's really where we're trying to put advanced manufacturing companies. You can see some of the ones that we've recently ticked off in terms of Saab is now they're opening a 300-person plant here for the next generation fighter jet project. You see a Rolls-Royce project up there under PTCA. That's where they're doing all their advanced engine testing. And we've got a whole series of companies that we're trying to attract to the area. Inside and to the right of that is really the mixed community and connected community. And so we've got plans to bring on over 3,500 units of housing. It's going to represent over $1 billion of investment when it's all built out over the next 5 to 10 years. If you think about the number of people that will be here in terms of living, working, playing, and you put the students, the 50,000 or so plus students that exist on campus, you're talking essentially about an area or encompassing about 75,000 people. In a metropolitan area that has about 250,000. Now, I gave Piyush's son a tour of campus. So to walk from the top corner to us and back is 9,000 steps. Okay, so that just gives you a sense of the density that you're talking about here, right? So extremely dense environment. And so some of us who are crazy enough to sort of think about things like this, this is what the architecture map and what my colleagues in PRF saw, who are mostly property developers. Trees, buildings, all these shiny objects, these kinds of things. This is what Troy and I saw. Take away the buildings, take away the ceilings, take away everything else. What do you see? You see the future, right, of a connected community, Internet of Things, AI, big data, and you see all the components of manufacturing on the right, mobility on the left, healthcare, living, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we started to brainstorm beside our, let's say, property developers on what we could do to really make this a connected community. We've studied connected cities in the past, Toronto being probably the best example. And we knew that there were a couple things that actually stood in the way of them really being a connected community. First and foremost is legacy infrastructure. Second is 1 million people as opposed to 25,000 people. And the other is governance structure. It's not all under one umbrella. It's multiple municipalities. So to get stuff done, extremely difficult. So in addition to our developers, we said, what's going to be key is not just road infrastructure, but digital infrastructure. So what that led us to is we started working with Piyush pre-SBA communications to think about a complete technology platform that we could, because it was still more or less greenfield, brownfield. How do we, and it looked like North Korea at night, totally dark. So there was no infrastructure here from a technology standpoint. So what do? We secured all the underground conduit rights. So not only do we have the above ground property rights managed by PRF, but we have all the below ground property rights managed by PRF. That's enabled us to start at the very bottom with a pre-planned community, a fiber backbone. We had a bunch of telco companies. We had a bunch of other companies tell us, we'll be your partner. We'll be your partner. And we said, we don't want your frickin' infrastructure dollars. We want your innovation dollars. We've got lots of people who can spend infrastructure dollars here. So we chose Tilson, which is a neutral host provider of infrastructure. And you'll see in the tour and that kind of thing, they've now completed 15 miles of fiber deployment throughout the district. It's connected, all comes into the same edge data center. So a little bit like Vegas, what happens in the district can stay in the district from a data and governance standpoint, and rollout of interesting use cases and applications. And you can see the different layers of the technology platform that we're now in the process of enabling. So everything below that blue line really speaks to the infrastructure that we're creating, and everything above that blue line is really connected community and how we see turning this really into a test bed. So to help us in that exercise, excuse me, in addition to Tilson and SBA, earlier this year, we invited a small complementary group of technology companies. You can see them here on the list. And we wanted to engage with their most senior level technology people. So to be part of this club, if you will, you have to be one of the chief technology officers or chief business strategy officers of the companies. And we're really engaging with them to help us think about what's the next stage of the technology platform. Help us understand what we can be doing here. The question I asked Yuri, what I found in ecosystem development is you don't want to compete with something that's already there, because then it's a win-lose proposition. our emphasis is all about how do we complement what you have and enhance it in such a way so that you're going to want to come here and work and play. And so that's what we've been doing with these different companies. And it's been fantastic because we've had now 2 meetings and we're really talking about strategic roadmaps, all the things that Dean Chang talked about in terms of 6G and beyond. We're starting to identify specific projects in those areas. So that just leads me to my final slide here, and then I'll stop, or two more slides. But this notion of Dean Chang talked about it, a lab to life platform, if you will. We believe that in this 400 acres, everything from advanced manufacturing to residential community life to research centers to being adjacent to a research university, connected to the second busiest airport, the state of Indiana, that trains more pilots, is the third largest trainer of pilots. And then the rural area that's around us, that we have a very, very unique ecosystem to advance innovation. Not just on the infrastructure side, which I've kind of highlighted, which is on the far right-hand side of that chart, but also in terms of use cases and applications. So we look forward to partnering wherever possible. And I just want to leave you with, I think it was Bernie who mentioned, we're in one of the most dense environments, Mayor Dennis said, probably 20th in the country. When the students come back, it looks like, Times Square with everybody running around campus, right? You're shaking your head. Yes. Is that correct? You're the rising senior, right? Exactly. So 8.25 miles, he's in the most rural county of Indiana, right? So this just shows you how we can go from the bullseye of Discovery Park with people that are going to pay to be here, pay to have infrastructure, pay to, how do you develop rural technology? Do you really do it in the farm fields? No, you got to do it in other places and then take it to the farm fields. You got to show people, those companies, how to advance. Where do they want to put their infrastructure dollars in? They want to put it in the urban areas. So you got to be able to show them and present a picture and a vision for how you can go from Discovery Park to the broader West Lafayette community, to the WIN network, which stands for Wabash Heartland Innovation Network. It's the 9 counties surrounding Tippecanoe County, and Johnny Parks is going to talk a little bit about that, to then the Midwest, for gosh sakes, because that's the scale that people want to start to deploy this kind of advanced infrastructure towards. So, and we're just right in the bullseye. And so we want to curate Discovery Park as a place that you can come. Sean Hendricks, who spoke in the opening session, talked about the new 5G lab that he's opening up around the corner here. So we're just very excited about what we're building here. We want your input. Again, how is what we are doing can complement or fit into what you're trying to achieve. We want to become a unique place where people want to come and live, work, play. That's why we're building all these apartment buildings and all these residential communities. So with that, I'll stop and either take some questions now or hand it off to. Okay.
My name is Piyush Raj. I think I gave my introduction before. I work for SBA Communication, which is one of the partner working with Purdue Research Foundation. And one of the things I will say, just to stay on David's vision, is the things about the open access model that he has preached and Troy and David has kind of have the vision for, has actually been recently being proposed by the administration. The administration proposed to cut down exclusive deals between the ISPs and the landowners. What does it mean is that they want tenants to have more options. So what was happening before is that the ISPs will come and they cut exclusive deal, which means that they can actually deploy their own infrastructure, but not allow other ISPs the block, which is the opposite of what David and Troy are trying to build here in this community. So that if that bill passes, I think that will really open up more of these connected communities out there, and we have been seeing a lot of that happening now. So to stay on where what we have done, so we have you see we have deployed a private network here, and Dr. Mung in his vision talked about the future. What it looks like is the emergence of private network. What does it mean is, like, you have seen all kind of public networks with carriers deploy, and it's like more non-customized network. It's like when you get off from the airport and instead of going on an Uber, you actually take a shuttle. So the shuttle will take you wherever, it takes all the rounds and it takes you to the places because it's non-customized. Versus you take an Uber and you go where you want to go and you pay for it, you have a platform and all that. That's what the future of network is, emergence of private networks is, because enterprises realize that their requirements is very different, and they cannot rely on fully on Wi-Fi because they need more. Even with Wi-Fi 6, they need more of the spectrum. And that's where the private network comes in, that are customized for manufacturing, because manufacturing is a completely different use case than deploying a private network in convergence, because it requires different latency, different throughput, all different characteristics. The same thing is, we will talk about the emergence of private network in rural, how it's going to solve the core of the rural broadband problem. Because what is happening is that fiber, if you look at fiber, is great. You will love to have fiber everywhere. But if you look at the economics of fiber in a rural area, if you start with urban has the best economics, because all the houses are close by. You can do fiber to the home at less than $100 a home for the capex. You go to suburban, it goes 100 times more, is $1,500, $2,000, because the homes are apart. You go to rural, you're at $8,000 to $10,000, and in some areas you can't even build it. So imagine if somebody's investing $8,000 on fiber to the home, how much time is going to take for them to recoup that investment? Even with RDOF, it's very hard, because it's a capex model is there, but you also need some operating expenses to make the money, the operating cost and all that. So that is where I think the fiber model kind of fails, because in the rural thing, what really is happening with emergence broadband, we have tried that in, I think I can move to the next slide, in this place in Jasper County called Kankakee Valley. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the county where Troy, David, and Mo were working with the school district on bringing them connectivity to 500 students in a very rural area in Jasper County. And obviously, there are a couple of options. One, we go with the existing provider with LTE coverage, which was not that great, the existing cellular coverage inside the home. You can certainly use your phones to make voice calls, but trying to do a video conferencing consistently inside your home is very difficult. The second option was somebody going to apply fiber to the home for these students, which is not happening in 1 year. It's going to take 4 years, and even we don't know who will do it. And the third option is what we came out with was, can you deploy a private network utilizing existing infrastructure? So the other thing is, wireless, you need some connection points where you're going to put the radios, where you're going to put the equipment. And we had SBA own 3 towers in this region. So when you see, like, from the left all the way to the right, the 3 towers, they're about 200 feet tall that we own, that we utilize to put the radios for private networks. And then one of the tower we built inside the elementary school, like just outside the elementary school, in the campus of the elementary school. And with that, within 6 to 7 months, we were able to get the network ready for providing connectivity to 500 students using a private network, and one of the advantage of private network is you can follow the policy. So schools, as you know, they're governed by a certain policy of how you actually use the internet. The students cannot go to certain sites. If the school is providing the internet, you can't do that with a T-Mobile hotspot, because T-Mobile hotspot, once you have it, you can go to any website. They're not going to block you. But with the private network, you can actually align with the policy of the school, because it's a private network, it's customized for you. And then you can then create slices to add more use cases on top of it. You can add telehealth, for example. So when you go to a telehealth use case, there are certain requirements that they won't allow their patients to use. If the hospital is providing the internet connectivity for their patients, they don't want these patients to access anything outside the website they go to for video conferencing. Then you can add that use case and you can customize it with another network slice. If you want a public safety use case, you can customize it with another network slice. So now you can create one network and you can support multiple slicing and make it more customized. That's what we did at Kankakee Valley. And what is happening is that this is expanding. We are seeing more and more school districts. We did a similar project in Marion County, Indiana, which was more for the underserved neighborhood. And the same things are expanding more and more. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. The funding has not aligned with this model fully, unfortunately. So that's the challenge. So and think about it this way: is like we talk about a middle mile and a last mile. So the middle mile, schools already have fiber coming to their school. Now you're basically taking that fiber and using wireless to extend that approach into the student's home. And the FCC doesn't allow it because they say you cannot only use E-rate for providing connectivity inside the school district. Yeah, the emergency broadband fund, they also excluded the private network. So I think the funding model hasn't fully aligned, but this is a great technology. So yeah, no, that's all I have. But thanks for giving us the opportunity to come and talk about it here.
You know, again, this is a multi-layered platform. And so you can see it involves the fiber and the edge data center. We're putting sensors and all kinds of devices throughout the district. We have a internet service providers. We didn't want to turn this into the Wild West. So we created what's called a walled garden, where we provided, choice by picking 3, including local internet providers. SBA comes in when it comes to things like spectrum and the private networks. We're also working with LoRa throughout the district. So again, multi-spectrum. And then obviously we can build our own networks, right? And the challenge, Sean Hendricks talked about his 5G lab, which is great in Indianapolis, but it's a lab that's half the size of this room. And you can move a robot over the surface of the room, but it's not really a scaled platform. And to get AT&T is not about to give their network to Sean and let's say Caterpillar or John Deere to ride a tractor down Meridian Street in Indianapolis, Indiana, on their operating system. So we're able to, through this passive approach, neutral host approach to developing the infrastructure, to not only provide, operations and services and things like that customers and residents and employees and companies are going to want, but we can also carve off because we own all the underlying rights and the management of this, from both spectrum to infrastructure to then the networks that get created. So that's what the companies are really, really excited about, is the opportunity and the interoperability of this, and how you hand off in a real world environment, the connectivity to reduce latency and some of those other kinds of things that Dean Chang was talking about in terms of open. The other thing is data, very, very important. We've also received funding recently from a donor to our Innovation Partners Institute. That's essentially the source at which we were able to do this pilot that Piyush mentioned with Mo and Kankakee Valley. But we're now looking at data because we also know that one of the shortcomings of smart cities is mistrust of information and data. And what do you do with that? So we really now are focused as well on, think of it like the homeowners association for your subdivision, right? We want to create the equivalent of that from a data management standpoint across the district. So how do you, who's part of that? How do you evaluate, the ability to use and test new things? Where does that data go? If there's a commercialization opportunity associated with it, how does that get defined? So this is not only about infrastructure, it's about use cases, it's about data, and it's also about economic models, and how you can sort of look at that and put those kinds of things together. So we're, again, very excited. We talk about this like we talk about our kids, thank you.
So I work with NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. We represent about 850 locally operated ISPs throughout the United States. We members serve 37% of the US landmass, but only about 5% of the population. They leverage a lot of FCC programs, USDA, RUS, different federal programs and state funding programs. But our latest survey shows that 70% of our members can serve 70% of their customer locations with speeds of, with fiber. 70% of the customer locations served by fiber, and 70% of those locations get speeds of 100 meg at least. So the average size of these companies, though, is about 4,500 customers. So question to think about, and maybe we can get into it, is how do we move this model where you've got 5 times, the density, to areas where not just 5 times the population, to areas where the density is about 7 people per square mile. Question 1. Question 2 is, what are the opportunities for regional collaboration? And I know that you mentioned that on one of your slides. Question 3 is, you talked about manufacturing 4.0, the need for workforce development and training to bring students in with digital skills to advance manufacturing processes. All right, so we now have on deck our 2 experts of providing broadband services in Indian country. We have Danae Wilson, who's going to go first, and then we're going to show a brief video, and we're going to introduce Katherine Igolao from Sacred Wind Communications. But Danae, if you can introduce yourself and share some time with us.
Great, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I wish I was there in person. I would love to see the demonstration of the project in person. So I'm very excited to participate and to learn how what you're doing there can influence what we're doing here. So Nez Perce Tribe is located in north central Idaho, and our reservation is was a BTOP awardee. Let me share my presentation here. And tell me if you can see the presentation. Can
Yep,
y'all?
we can.
Okay, perfect. So Nez Perce Tribe has been involved in doing smart communities since about 2016, 2017. And the very first time NTCA invited me to a Smart Cities conference, I sat in the meeting and I was like, what the hell am I doing here? I couldn't put myself in the position of how is this going to work in my community. By the afternoon, the light bulbs started going off, and you start putting connection together about what is necessary in my rural community and how the Smart Cities initiatives can influence what I'm doing in my small community. And so our area is geographically diverse. We have a lot of river canyons, a lot of draws where people live. We have a ton of farmland. And so building in rural communities, as was already mentioned, fiber is really difficult, but you have to start identifying what can be done and what is feasible, and long-term, how do you support it? So you start thinking about enhancements to how we're already doing business. When you talk about identifying potential partners, you have to think about what is their interest in your community and how long are they going to be there. So some of the partners that you have that you rely on are your law enforcement and your first responders, because of course they're always going to be there. And then you think about your other partners, the farmers that live in the area who are running these huge farm operations. They're always going to be there. Schools and universities, clinics, hospitals. So you think about your long-term partners, what their needs are, and then how do we build on those needs? Excuse me. And then from there, you start moving into IoT. What can we do to make their business better? And how do we manage our rural environments in a smarter way? Whether it's for dispatch or monitoring, prevention, fire detection. Right now, the West is on fire. You've probably seen it on the nightly news. So how can we use our infrastructure to better do IoT and use the resources that we have in a smarter way? So here in these pictures, you see where we're doing fire detection off of one of our towers. That tower happened, this was the fires in 2016. We're using drones, we're using smart water sensors. So IoT has become critically important in our rural area and how we manage and respond to any environmental issues or any law enforcement issues, and definitely environmental monitoring. So we talk about workforce development. In the past, of course, it was very difficult to find a network technician. Let's just say a fiber certified technician. 3 years ago, it was very, very difficult. We had to bring people from Seattle or from Boise to come and do fiber termination in some of these rural locations. And so what we see now is we see that that workforce development, we're bringing the trainers here. We're training large amounts of staff on from all over the place, not just tribal staff, but the local cellular company, the local telephone companies, the hospitals, the entrepreneurs, the private business. We bring everybody to one training center and we train as many people as possible, because these are the skilled services that everybody needed. And this thought process came out of a NSF big data conference that I attended about 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And so training and keeping our local workforce skilled in the tasks that were necessary to maintain these networks that we're installing became critically important. Tower climbers, windmills. We have tons of windmills out here. How do you repair them? How do you change the light? All those service technician jobs that people were having to be sent in from major urban areas to respond to our needs here locally. And again, it goes back to those partnerships, making sure that you are partnering not only with the local schools, high schools, in employee days where students are looking at what are they going to go into college for, and how can they leave to go to college and get a degree and come home to the places that they consider home, and have a meaningful job that they can be satisfied income-wise, and then be able to live in the homes the areas that they call home. So we start at the high school, we do the career days, we do all the, and then we move into the college and we start bringing in interns, and we rely on partners with NSF research grants to have students come back into these communities and do environmental research on our reservation. So then those individuals who left have an opportunity to come back and look for employment on the reservation, and bring their skills, what they're learning in those well-connected communities that they're going to school in, bring them back to the reservation and help us determine what we can do and how we can advance our communities. So it could be anything from broadcast, it can be anything from fisheries management, natural resource management, and then of course, tower maintenance, and all those partnerships with government agencies, private agencies, schools and colleges. Those are critically important to ensure that our regions can be smart and operate in a global economy. Our engagement processes are to ensure that we're taking the individuals from our area. What does our area need? What do the businesses need? How do we advance our local economies? And then what does it take to bring those individuals on board to start a project? And how do we make that project meaningful and important to the community? And definitely, how do we include any of the new smart technologies that are available for any given industry? And it goes back to why partner with a tribe? Why would anybody be interested in partnering with tribes? Well, simply, it's the opportunity. You're talking about 400 acres next to your school where you can do this innovation. We're talking about hundreds of more acres than that on our tribal reservations, who happen to border all the natural Forest Service and all the protected lands in the country border tribal reservations. So you're coming to an ecological test bed, right? We are your test community, and our communities are providing the food that goes onto the world's tables, right? So our import and export of all of the export of our foods from these rural communities, and what countries they're going to, and how can we in these small rural areas help identify and plan for advanced technologies, and how do we do that in a meaningful way that we can continue our partnerships with whatever agency it may be, federal, state, or private. And there's definitely challenges, right? So the challenges is our locations. We're very rural, and so housing, coming here. In the past, we have seen where before COVID, let's say, where we had a difficult time getting people interested in coming to our tribal lands. During the COVID period, though, we were able to identify that you can manage, you can be a PI on an NSF grant and manage that grant remotely when you have field staff here doing the work. So hiring local, using local individuals to do the research components on it. So we definitely have ready workforce, and we have networks that can be developed and added to ensure that we're meeting the needs of whatever agency that we're trying to service. We do have coverage disparities, don't get me wrong. We do rely primarily on a wireless infrastructure here because, of course, the cost of fiber is so high to get fiber to a premise. So fiber to the home is a privilege to the towns that may be none of the rural residents, those several homes per mile, definitely aren't seeing fiber to the home, but wireless infrastructure is predominantly the way that we cover our reservations. And then, you know, of course, we have to think about some of the safety concerns. On the screen there, you'll see some bullet holes that a very rural resident was extremely unsatisfied. We brought in law enforcement and first responder networks, and somebody with a high-powered rifle very far away from the cameras was able to shoot up some of that equipment, and was very angry that we were bringing this connectivity specifically for law enforcement and first responders. Of course, that has not happened since this equipment was replaced, but we were clearly needed to go back to our stakeholders and ensure that they had a voice and that we could explain what we were doing and how we were rolling out our networks. But that just demonstrates the demand for skilled labor here locally to help maintain equipment and to provide services. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, but those are some of the things that reservations deal with on a regular everyday basis. And we are definitely making every effort to find local partners and regional partners, national partners to help build our infrastructure. I've been building broadband networks in a country for about 30 years. So that's sort of telling my age, but it's not the easiest location to build tribal networks, but or rural networks, but it's definitely extremely meaningful. And we are eager to try and test, almost bleeding edge, what is it going to take to provide service in this area, and who could those potential partners be? So I don't want to delay us any longer, so I'll yield the floor to my counterpart.
Danae, thanks very much. I'd like to introduce now Katherine Igolao from Sacred Wind Communications based in New Mexico.
Hi, good afternoon. Hey, Josh.
John Bedell Yinishe, Sacred Wind Banash Nish Natane Nishle. As I travel around New Mexico, I've always been struck by the lack of opportunities in some rural parts of the state, especially in the tribal areas. National companies don't have the business plan and the motivation to provide service to sparsely populated, low-income areas. I chose to introduce broadband and basic telecommunication services to the Navajo because I saw that no one else was doing it, and it had to be done. Sacred Wind is a newly found broadband company that was created in 2006 to serve unserved areas and underserved areas of the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. Most of our employees are Navajo. Sandra is one of our road warriors. She speaks Navajo fluently, which is quite needed in the more remote areas of Navajo lands.
She Sandra Haun Shendo the Sacred Wind Banashnish ko CP that's in Nako a companashnish a kuna bahasi she Danae nanish educachini slonses lahni basishin at oge dash nelado nakaitane dash che. Working here at Sacred Wind Communication, I go out into the field, going house to house, getting to know the families, what they're going through.
The Navajo Nation itself encompasses an area that's larger than the state of West Virginia. Our service territory alone, which represents just 15% of Navajo lands, is twice the size of the state of Delaware. But I think the pandemic has shone a light now on the need for everyone to have the same access to healthcare, to have the same access to schools now that the schools are closed.
Ich met secretary in Shia, the Nens letter, Torge letter, Nasha, and Torge in Shla, Iskine Bashish.
Yat she bedilu secretary in Shiato, Tachi in Shlo, a she Bashishin.
We have two boys, Mason and Matthew Secretero Jr. They go to school and online from out of a program in Santa Fe. It's a homeschool. They get daily live lessons every day.
As an EA at the school down here, I have students that I work with every day.
Towards the end of our first semester, we started running heavy issues, and that was the time when they had their finals.
But now, as they have hooked us up to the fiber optic line, it's a lot of stress off of us, especially for the boys, because we had to take them into town
to Albuquerque to eat at McDonald's
to do their lessons.
Yeah. I think it's just for us to catch up with the rest of the whole world, I guess we'll say.
My name is Suzanne Charlie. We live here in Pinedale, New Mexico.
One day I was just driving around and I saw their little home. I stopped by, and Steve and Charlie and Susan, they were unable to get the electricity because the electricity was so high that they couldn't pay for it. I told them that we do have a solar unit if you guys are interested.
Ever since we got this internet, my kids have been wanting to come here more often. We're just happy that we got this Sacred Wind.
Brightens my day. It makes me happy to know that I help somebody, I help a family get a phone and internet service.
The reason that so many tribal people, especially in the state, have not had access to broadband previously is that too many people in the industry and many policymakers in the state saw the issue as almost insurmountable.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katherine Igolao, and I'm the External Affairs and Marketing Manager for Sacred Wind Communications. I want to thank Josh Seidemann as our moderator. Thank you for all your guidance and help throughout this process. And of course, Purdue University, NTCA, and everyone that's been involved in putting this on and including Sacred Wind, in this conference. Is it all good, Josh? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can hear you, but I'm just trying to get you to fill the screen instead of this through the looking glass prism of all of us watching you.
Yeah. Is it something on my end?
No, I think it's from us.
Okay, I'll just continue. So the video that you just saw was commissioned by NTCA, but it was filmed and produced by a company called Telwell out of North Dakota. As the marketing manager for Sacred Wind, I was quite delighted. We were very honored that NTCA would ask to feature Sacred Wind in one of their videos. It's been instrumental in helping educate industry and policymakers on some of the issues that providers face, right, in rural and tribal areas, but also the living conditions of our customers, and also the beauty of the state that I live in, of New Mexico. I'm going to venture to say that if providing broadband were an Olympic sport, Sacred Wind Communications would probably be on the Team USA. But let me explain why I say that. So we are one of the newest ILECs in the country, incumbent local exchange carrier. We're the only privately owned RLEC in the state of New Mexico providing services, telecommunication services, to tribal parts, to the Navajo Nation. So we provide telephone and high-speed internet. Our service territory, as you saw in that video, is 3,200 square miles. And as was mentioned, really only encompasses 15% of the entire Navajo Nation. Our service territory is topographically challenging. New Mexico is a beautiful place to be. And you can drive from Albuquerque to Gallup, which is about 200 miles or so. And you'll get lava rock, you'll get valleys, mesas, you name it, we've got it here in New Mexico. 98% of our customers are Navajo. 80% of them utilize the federal Lifeline program. And over half of our employees are Navajo as well. And so we service parts of 22 Navajo chapters. In 2006, when the company began operations, only 26% of homes had access to E911. No one had access to high-speed internet. I'm going to repeat that so that it can kind of sink in. Only 26% of homes had access to landline service. Nobody had access to high-speed internet. You fast forward to today, and over 90% of our customers have access to some of the highest internet speeds found on tribal lands. We are now providing fiber to the hogan, is what we call it. A hogan is a traditional Navajo ceremonial structure. But basically, we're providing fiber to some of the lowest income, most sparsely populated areas of this country. We also provide fiber to the home in Navajo housing developments, and these are NHA developments where there are clusters of homes. But we don't stop there. We provide fiber in To'Hajiilee chapter, where there just recently, earlier this year, we got fiber to 30 homes that have never had telecommunications before. Can you imagine never having it, and now you have fiber? I mean, that's life-changing. So Sacred Wind has built a model for other companies, other tribes, other communities to use to bridge the digital divide in this country. Our mission has always been to provide equality of opportunity to communities that have for so long been forgotten. The company started with a low interest RUS loan, but truthfully, it is the Federal Universal Service Fund with the high cost loop support, the CAF BLS support, that gives Sacred Wind the ability and financial means to invest and extend services to our customers. Only 10% of our revenue comes from our customers. The poverty rate on the Navajo Nation is 49%. The national poverty rate, I looked 2 days ago, it's like 13.8%. So we have to be able to leverage a variety of funding sources to be successful. And thankfully, later on in the panel, we'll be hearing from different funding sources. Sacred Wind recently, as last year in 2020, was awarded an RUS Reconnect grant, where we're able to provide fiber to the home to 1,600 underserved locations in Sierra County, New Mexico, which happens to be 300 miles away from our closest facilities. So that is something we're extremely excited about. It'll be quite a lift, but we're so grateful to be able to do that. The other thing that has allowed Sacred Wind to be successful is the fact that we've always been technology agnostic. So we have one of the most robust fixed wireless networks. And we've trialed TV white space. We are currently working with the Navajo Nation to trial the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, and that's in collaboration with Navajo Technical University as well. I mean, I guess the whole point of that is there's just no one size fits all, right? Which we heard from other presenters as well. We have an IP-based network, which we build to be future-proof and scalable. Now, I got to tell you, that was extremely important in 2020, right? When we were getting bombarded by school districts, we got a call from a local hospital that did not call the incumbent. Then they didn't call their incumbent telecom company. They called the local company. They called us. And within 5 days, we had basically a Wi-Fi hotspot turned up. And we also, it was a Wi-Fi hotspot turned up at the family tent outside of the hospital. And we also were able to boost the service inside the ICU. so that family members could drive from anywhere on the Navajo Nation, come to this hospital, go to the family tent, and say goodbye to a loved one dying of the virus, but it was all with an iPad. So we work hand in hand with the communities that we serve. That is another reason why we've been able to do what we do. Sometimes that means solving basic needs. In the winter, we've had to provide firewood to customers. We've had to provide water during the holiday season. We have food drives. But you saw in that video our solar program. That is quite unique. When the company was founded by John Bedell, he identified about 1,200 homes in our service territory that lacked electricity, access to electricity. It's 2021 and we're still talking about these things. It's mind-boggling to me. And so rather than saying, well, you know what, we're a telecom company, we're not an electric company, that's not our problem. We said, how are we going to solve that problem? And so we devised that solar program, and it's also been very life-changing for many of our customers. We also have a digital literacy program. We have a whole website dedicated to digital literacy. In our opinion, it's one thing to get the infrastructure, in the ground and to the customer premise, right? It's another thing to be able to educate and inform the customer how to turn on a computer, how to safely surf the internet, how to apply for jobs, how to sell their beautiful artwork online anywhere in the world. And so we're currently partnering with Microsoft on the Airband initiative to provide digital literacy skills to Navajo customers. Outreach is huge. You might find this interesting. Our customer service representatives still go door to door. So I don't know about you, but my ISP probably doesn't know me from Adam, but our customer service reps know our customers. They know the families, they know who lives in the house, and they go check on them, especially in the winter, and they go door to door. But that builds that trust and that sense of we're here for the right reason. We also have a very robust and culturally sensitive marketing department, which I head up. When we do marketing to rural and tribal areas, it is not about being a salesperson. It's not about making a quick buck. It's actually something very different. It's about informing. It's about saying, hey, there's an FCC, emergency broadband program that you might qualify for. Here's how to apply. Here's how you would, be eligible for that. All kinds of different things like that. Informing them about upload, download speeds. It's all about education and information so that they know how to use that to better their lives. So I'll leave you with this. It's investing in the rural and tribal areas. If people are in it to make a quick buck, obviously we all here know that that's not going to happen. If the return on investment one is looking for is a dollar sign, that may not be in the right place. If the return on investment that one is looking for is positively affecting future generations of Americans and allowing fellow Americans to live with dignity, then we're all in the right place. And we also have a lot of work that needs to be done. Thank you.
My name is Sarah Blue. And like Josh said, I've got a lot of information here that I'm going to go through very quickly. The main reason there's so much information is because I think that it is helpful and I'd like to leave it as a leave behind. I'm here on behalf of NTIA and the Broadband USA team. I'm actually here in place of Jean Rice. I know that she would love to be here with you. Selfishly, I'm very excited to be here. I feel like I'm coming home. I am a Boilermaker, so it's pretty cool to see how State Street has changed since I was there. Many of the companies, Sacred Winds, SBA, who already been up on the stage to talk, I'm very familiar with. We're here talking about internet, and from a Broadband USA perspective, we're here to talk about some of the funding opportunities, which I think can make these things happen. I'm not going to read through this slide, but I would like you to be familiar with NTIA's mission. Our mission is to promote innovation and economic growth by supporting the efforts to expand broadband connectivity and meaningful use across America. We serve state, local, tribal governments, we serve industry and nonprofits, and we're all trying to enhance broadband connectivity and promote digital inclusion. Our focus is in alignment with the Biden administration, the goal or the agenda to bring internet to every American. To do that, we partner with these organizations. We provide technical assistance and facilitate cohorts and other collaborative events. We also offer tools and resources on broadband planning, deployment, and adoption. I'm going to give you a very high, here's just a screenshot of a very high overview of the 3 grants that we're currently working on here at NTIA. This is all part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. The Department of Commerce is here administering the Broadband Infrastructure Deployment Grant, Connecting Minority Communities pilot program, as well as the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Grant. The first one, the Broadband Infrastructure Program, is for $288 million. And it comes with this idea of a covered partnership, which is basically a state or a political subdivision of a state partnered with a provider of fixed broadband service. There's covered broadband projects will be described in this program, which is providing qualifying broadband service in an eligible service area. And the most important thing on this slide, I think, is that we are accepting applications for this grant through August 17th. So we just have a few more weeks. Like I said, the covered partnership is between a state and a fixed, or excuse me, a political subdivision of the state and some kind of service provider. Qualifying broadband service has been defined as what the FCC calls broadband service of at least 25 down and 3 megs up. And we've also defined, if you go to our notice of funding opportunity, you'll see the definition of latency. We understand that there are areas of this country that can only be reached through satellite or other wireless means. So these are just guidelines. The definition of unserved for this grant is if there is any household in a census block or a business in a census block that is unserved or unable to get that 25/3 service, then the census block is eligible. And I think I've covered everything here. We covered partnership, talking about a broadband project, a proposed service area, and in the application, if you are receiving any other federal or state support, we'd like to understand that because we're trying to avoid any overbills or duplication of grants. The Connecting Minority Communities is a pilot program. We're just kicking this off, and what we're really looking for here is innovation. This is $268 million. This is for historically Black colleges, universities, tribal colleges, universities, minority serving institutions, or consortiums led by one of those organizations that includes a minority business enterprise. This is used for the purchase of internet access or equipment, or to hire and train personnel. And anybody who's been following us on our webinars knows that the notice of funding is not yet available. We anticipate that that will be available about mid-August. There's a lot of information here. If you read the final rule that we posted to our website, you'll understand that we have determined what this the greatest unmet need, really means. But basically there's no matching requirement. There's about 40% of the grants will go to HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities, and 20% will go to eligible students for broadband access or devices. The Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, which as Josh mentioned, I'm going to hop off at about 2:59 Eastern to go moderate that webinar today, is $980 million. And this one's really exciting. This is for tribal governments, tribal colleges and universities, Department of Hawaiian Homelands, tribal organizations, Alaska Native corporations. This is for the deployment or construction and or the adoption and use of broadband service on tribal lands. And that window for applications is now open. We're accepting applications through grants.gov, through the mail, through all kinds of means through September 1st. I've already explained here, these are the eligible entities. Real quick, before I go into another funding source, I would like to make a shout out. We at NTIA are looking for people to help us. In order to get the money out, we need merit reviewers. We need people to help take a look at these applications as they come in. I think that all of you in this audience, you have a good understanding of how broadband infrastructure works. You're familiar with remote learning and telehealth. So if you've got an interest in possibly helping us review some of these applications, we have a process. If there's a conflict of interest, if you're concerned your company is applying, then, or your partnership, if you're concerned about that, we've got other geographies we can take a look at. There will be training provided, and we anticipate probably about 3 hours per application. of your time. So if you think you might be interested or you know anybody who is, right now is the time to get your resume in to grantreviewer@ntia.gov and include this information. I'm going to speak very high level about what the Treasury's got going on. There's basically, I can say there's $350 billion that is, broadband will be one of the competitive, it'll be a competitive bid or opportunity to provide broadband for the states. This is for state, territorial, local territories, tribal governments to invest in broadband infrastructure. And the Treasury's done a really good job keeping FAQs on their website. They do things like, for example, can you use these funds for middle mile? I know that that's a big question that looms in the minds of a lot of people in this audience. So I would encourage you to go take a look at the Treasury's website where they've got their FAQs posted. They update them rather frequently. And last but not least, all of this information, as well as other federal funds, are available. If you go to our Broadband USA website, we've got this funding search. We've just updated it so you can download this into an Excel spreadsheet, or if you just want to take a look at it, it's designed to be a one-stop for all kinds of information about funding for broadband that are available through the federal agencies. We've got this, anybody who's familiar with NTIA knows that we have, for states and federal agencies, this, what we call the NBAM, the National Broadband Availability Map. That is like 3 terabytes, I think, of data. It's hundreds of layers. And the goal there is to help states and federal agencies understand why Americans are not accessing, or why people are not using the internet, if it's an issue of access or if it's an issue of affordability. And what we've done is we've taken a skinny version of the NBAM tool and we've made this available to the public. This Indicators of Broadband Need Map just takes a couple of those layers. It is nothing but an indication of the discussion that we're having. It combines the 477 info that you get from the FCC, that the service providers tell us where they cannot do 25.3. It's got crowdsourced data from Ookla, Microsoft, and MLab, and then we have data in there from the American Census, from the Census, the ACS surveys, to talk about poverty thresholds, what percent of a county are people not taking, do they not have subscriptions to the internet or tablets, computers, some kind of device like that. It's not, there's no silver bullet. This is purely a tool to begin having the conversation about why are so many areas red, red, red. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And then finally, we have the State Broadband Leaders Network, and we've got digital inclusion resources available on our website. So please go take a look. And there we go. I hope I was quick. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks very much. Robert C. from USDA, who can share with us expertise, not just on the funding opportunities, but particularly his experience in tribal lands as well.
And what I'm going to do is give you the lightning tour of USDA broadband things, which we already did the lightning tour. I thought I'd set the stage by the Rural Utilities Service, where I am, is actually the successor of the original Rural Electrification Administration, which was created in the 1930s to bring electricity to rural areas of the United States. And for the very same reasons that we needed in the 1930s to bring electricity to rural areas. You've heard all the discussion that electricity was already in the urban areas of the United States and was not going to come to rural areas because it did not fit the business model of the electric utilities of the time. They focused on population density. Does that sound familiar? They focused, so basically they focused on cities. It didn't have the profit model, the business model that they used. That same business model really does apply to what's going on now in telecommunications. So the need was identified, and under the New Deal, federal funds were used to bring broadband out to rural areas in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And actually, I know that only less than 10 years ago, there were 2 areas in California that were connected to the grid, only 10 years ago. Now, this is important because unless you have electricity, you're not going to have broadband. From the very basic point is you can't recharge this without electricity. So so you have to have that first before we even get there. So from that, then we go into the rural utility service. We expanded into telecommunications. We actually started with rural telephone service back in the 50s, and then in the 90s and 80s expanded into telecommunications or broadband. We have 4 basic programs: the telecommunications infrastructure program, the rural broadband program, Community Connect, and Reconnect. I'm just going to skip through real quickly. Hold on a second. Where's the arrow? There we go. The telecommunications infrastructure loan program, it's funded to $690 million. It's open year-round applications. It's somewhat of a legacy of the old rural telephone service funding, because many of the applicants are actually rural telephone companies that have gone into broadband. That's all, and it's basically focuses on communities of less than 5,000. The Community Connect program, there's a little typo in there in terms of when applications are accepted. It says June 4th. That's actually a different program. But the Community Connect grant program, it is a grant program. 2, I actually love this program because it's a small program, so it's something a community can wrap themselves around. Funds to $100,000 to $3 million. It does have a 15% matching requirement, which is not too hard to meet. This program is always oversubscribed. There's about $65 million available this year. And they're actually reviewing the applications, which actually came in at the end of last year for this program. The Reconnect program is really the big program. It's very new. Congress created it only about 2 years ago. There have been round 1 in 2019 and round 2 in 2020. The 2 programs, there's about $1.3, $1.4 billion of funding of the 2. And this is a program that is a mixture of grants, grant loan combos, and loans. Again, our definition of rural in this is communities of less than 20,000 in population. We use a different definition of broadband service, or the definition of what is unserved, and it's the 10-1 number that we use at USDA. But the minimum build out speed is 25.3, or the FCC standard. And just so you know, round 3 is coming this fall. It probably will be announced sometime early fall, maybe September is a goal for that. I'll just mention the distance learning telemedicine grant program. I won't read that stuff through there. It is not actually a broadband program, but it is a program that funds how you connect to the internet and the equipment and the staff. It's very similar to the description you just heard about from NTIA on their programs. And I think the language that they have came from the USDA distance learning telemedicine grant program. But it gives you the idea that we hit all these facets. There's the actual hard infrastructure, and then there's the part of connecting to it that we're looking at. The program historic numbers, the bottom number is $8 billion since fiscal 2020 that USDA has funded in rural areas. So it gives you an idea of the size of the program. And again, really the largest number is the $1.3 billion, 165 projects funded in the last 2 years. The last time we had large amounts of funding, the Broadband Initiatives Program, was under the Recovery Act under the Obama administration more than 10 years ago. So when we look at this, and I was able to pull, because we had a discussion about funding for tribes. So I was able to pull the USDA numbers, which just only covers 2018 and 2019. And there was about, so that's pre-Reconnect. There's about $20 million in funding for tribes in the 3 different programs that we have. But I thought that it would be useful to give you a kind of a snapshot or a case example of USDA and tribes. Because as you've already heard, tribes are the most rural, most disconnected, of any population or sector in the US population. So it's a very good example of what we can do, and I think from an equity standpoint, that we should do. So Seneca Nations, and then this is I took this from, they did a presentation at a tribal conference last year, and this shows you where they are. So you have some idea in New York State. And they received actually 2 USDA Reconnect broadband investments. One was $4.3 million from round 1, and the other one was a smaller $544,000 in round 2. And I won't read the whole quote from Seneca Nation President Ricky Armstrong, but he talked about the Reconnect Program award from USDA will help the Seneca Nation take a major step forward to closing the digital divide. And that is actually really the point of those programs. And then, another facet, and you actually heard this earlier in this description of how tribes, it's not a single federal agency or program or any single entity that provides the support. Progress does require multiple partners. And as much as you have heard and probably know, that the federal government with different departments and different agencies within the department are somewhat siloed. But if you look at all the pieces, they all add up. So what I highlighted here, just for you to see, for what Seneca Nations did, is they got an EDA grant, which helped fund a piece. You have the 2 USDA Reconnect grants. You have FCC gave them a 2.5 gigahertz license, which you heard on the other example earlier. There was another Indian Energy and Economic Development grant from the Department of Interior. So those are different federal pieces that came in to support one goal, which gives you an idea. If you focus, you can grab these pieces. And then to the future, you already just heard about the NTIA Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program for 2021. I'd mentioned the USDA Reconnect Round 3 in 2021. So hopefully one could leverage both. And then I'll finish here, that the path to broadband, there are a lot of pieces to it, and that just sort of graphically illustrates that. But I also want to illustrate something else that we did on the federal government side in terms of looking at, this is with NTIA, and the person at NTIA who should get all the credit for this is Jean Rice, my colleague at NTIA, and she led sort of a section which we just titled it the NTIA 2.5 gigahertz middle mile project. And there was a title that basically brought several of us in federal agencies and outside of federal agencies to work together to find the resources and assistance for tribes to implement the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum awards. Because I'll just give you the short description of that. The FCC granted 2.5 gigahertz spectrum to tribes at no cost, but they did not provide the funds to implement the 2.5 gigahertz. And if you get the 2.5 gigahertz, you have about 2 years to implement it, or you lose the license. The license is of tremendous value. Spectrum is worth a lot. So one of the things that we did was we put our heads together, and what was developed was what this thing is called the Internet Access Critical Infrastructure for Tribal Nations. It's a white paper that was basically written by TechSoup, and I helped work on it, and Jean helped work on it, and many others, including some people that were on earlier on this. And it was the development of a paper that's essentially, it's a pitch paper for small, medium-sized foundations, so that foundations who are now interested in helping with tribal broadband, how can they help? And they have much smaller amounts of funding. And so they're thinking, well, I can't fund a $25 million infrastructure project. However, they can come in, they have 2 advantages. One, they can turn around and decide if I want to fund a piece of a project, they can make that decision and cut the check tomorrow. If you come to the federal government, it's going to take a while because you just have to go through the process. There's nothing one can do about that timing of it. The second part is there are small pieces out there which actually do not fit any of the federal programs in terms of what we can fund, but can really help a tribe. And it could be, it's like that, the nail, the shoe, or the horse, that kind of thing, that $50,000 could fund a technical study by the tribe to draw up the first plan, which you got to have. And if they didn't have the funding, this could be it. So there's all these little pieces that could fund a specific piece of equipment, but they can turn around quickly. It's the flexibility there. So we saw this as an opportunity on the federal side, as it's not so much us funding, but making the argument so funding could come from philanthropic organizations and move in as they become interested in that. So I'm finished there.
All right, next up, Matt Suchodolski, who is with the Economic Development Administration. And the next few speakers we have really demonstrate that there are, in addition to NTIA and USDA and the FCC, there are agencies and administrations and a role for private capital in these matters as well.
I do want to extend thanks to the leadership of the Global Cities Challenge team, as well as Joshua, a name we've all heard often with these presentations, Gene Rice of NTIA, Danae and Katherine in particular, because you know, they're out there implementing. They're leaders and they're implementing. They're doing the heavy lifts. That's really to be appreciated and recognized, at least from this standpoint and presenter here. Also want to extend thanks to Robert and Tim, our colleagues at USDA as well as Treasury. Matthew Suchodolski, I serve as a program management analyst with the Economic Development Administration's Philadelphia Regional Office. What does that mean? I serve as an economic development integrator for the Philadelphia Regional Office, which is one of 6 EDA regions. It basically is the northeastern sweep of the United States, often referred to as the Boswash Corridor. And bear with me, I need to get to the appropriate screen. EDA's mission is to lead the federal economic development agenda, promoting innovation, competitiveness, preparing American regions for growth and success in the worldwide economy. Many of the presenters today are doing just that. They are working on those efforts. On the right side of this screen, you're going to see 3 resources. Let's, affectionately call them the Holy Trinity, if we may. A range of EDA programs. That is constant, it's always available, and it's always ease of access. Current funding opportunities. That changes over the course of time relative to fiscal year or special appropriations, as we all have been experiencing. And very, very importantly, is your set of regional office contacts. Please feel free to use that and explore that. EDA prides itself on having a state level contact for all of the 50 states, as well as possessions and territories. Those individuals, typically referred to as economic development representatives, they're your usher, they are your guide, they are your partner, they are there to work with you and the economic development districts that are on the ground. Very key resource. EDA does like to pride itself on financially supporting federal support for healthy ecosystems, right? And here we have something that looks like the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Starting at basic infrastructure at the base, leading all the way up to innovation engines. And of course, we see the appropriateness of technology infrastructure there as well, leading to business support. Woven throughout, as you can see with the yellow perimeters, people and culture, very important terms, identifiers as we move through this presentation. And I am trying to mind the clock per se. When Gene Rice and Joshua approached the federal team, we were asked to speak on programs. So I'm going to give you a high-level overview of EDA's programs. We will not get under the hood and do the diagnostics today, if that's okay. Planning, one of EDA's most basic programs, primarily designed for regions and communities to develop comprehensive economic development strategies. If you walk and talk with anyone at EDA, you'll often see that they use the acronym CEDS, Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies. And there are certain guidelines or wide-ranging prescriptions as to what that criteria for a CEDS should entail. So that, I say should in quotes because there is what the region and community needs, but there is also the balance point with EDA's regulatory or prescribed criteria, which over the course of the past 12 years has become much broader and less prescriptive, allowing economic participants to work with that wider casting, that wider net. Public Works, this is EDA's bread and butter program. It's from the core of inception in 1965. Roads, water, and sewer. It can also include broadband capacity, the basics for what drives an economy. You need to move the trucks. You need to move financial transactions. Roads and broadband can do that. They can be categorized as public works. Economic adjustment is EDA's widest ranging program tool. As I often and affectionately say, it can be used for infrastructure. It can also be used for study money per se, feasibility study, market analysis, not market promotion, but market analysis. Local technical assistance is one of EDA's smaller programs at the regional office level. And there it is, self-explanatory. It can provide program funding to fill that knowledge and information gap to help leaders make calculated and well-informed decisions. University centers are a form of technical assistance. Let's consider it a subset, hence the indentation. And those are run on a regional perspective with each of EDA's 6 regional offices through a measured competition. And those awards, those programs run on 5-year increments. So it's a 5-year expectation of which grant funds are awarded in annual installments. All of these programs that you see on this page, they are basically run through each of EDA's 6 regional offices. A good level of customized support that's not always Washington, D.C. centric. Moving on to some additional programs, Build to Scale. Some of you may know it from Regional Innovation Strategies. This is a rather new program within EDA's funding portfolio. And it is not rooted in the Public Works and Economic Development Act of 1965, but it is more so of the America Competes Act, which I believe emanated in maybe 2007 or 2008. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Trade adjustment assistance for firms. EDA works with 11 trade adjustment assistance centers throughout the nation. If there are business interests that have been negatively impacted, adversely impacted by foreign competition, trade adjustment assistance is an appropriate tool to connect those business interests. Research and National Technical Assistance is a program run through the Washington, D.C. offices. It leads cutting edge research, world-class economic development practices. And then the final one, Economic Development Integration. It is a line of business. It is not necessarily a funding program per se, but it makes capacity available to stakeholders that wish to delve in the economic development realm with federal, state, local support, but may need that additional capacity to extend their reach to other partner agencies. EDA does maintain a set of investment priorities. These do shift with the times. This set of 7 that I'm going to present is about 2.5 months old. This comes in with the new administration. So we went from a previous 4 investment priorities to 7. And we can see here that equity, recovery and resilience, workforce development, manufacturing, technology-based economic development. You're all well acclimated to that. Environmentally sustainable development. And of course, the good old standard of the Department of Commerce, exports and foreign direct investment. Very key for a certain agency called the Department of Commerce. Those are the investment priorities. So we did a 30,000-foot view of the programs. We did not get into the diagnostics. We can certainly do that on another time, or you're more free to do that with your economic development representatives. And we did take a look at the current investment priorities. You are seeing this slide once again, to prompt your thinking on those EDA call-outs, programs, investment priorities, and how they may fit into a particular ecosystem. Again, focusing on people and culture. What may work in suburban Philadelphia does not work in Taos, New Mexico. Not a one-off, not a one-to-one replication. Respectful of people and culture. Furthermore, with people and culture, the investment priorities are designed to establish a foundation for, of course, sustainable job growth, building durable regional economies. So what you have here is an economy. You have the 6 EDA service areas, regional offices, 6 of them regionally based. And then on the right side of the screen, you have EDA's, dare I say, primary or core client base, which we often refer to as economic development districts. These are multi-county organizations, most often a state-sanctioned planning and development district, most often. That's the template. There are a few that depart from that template based on state enabling statutes and core economic development needs. Take a look at that central and northeastern part of Arizona. That's a big geography there, comparatively speaking. Rolling into a little bit of a sharper focus relative to the Global Cities Team Challenge partners. Our colleague Gene Rice did ask for a bit of focus on the tri-state region, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and the Ohio food system region. You can see that regional initiative's core statement right there. You can see a map of that 250-mile radius around Pittsburgh that stems into several states, basically the heart of Appalachia, as well as probably a core of, coal and gas these days. And for comparative purposes, the map below that with the shades of gray and the light pink is an example of the EDA branded economic development districts within that region. You can see that it's fair to say the vast majority of Pennsylvania is covered. The entirety of West Virginia is covered with economic development districts. Again, these planning institutions, these regional economic development corporations, they have a long-standing level of dialogue and partnership with EDA. So for example, Mr. Christopher Casper, who is the economic development representative for Pennsylvania, basically he has an ongoing relationship with the staff and the directors of each of those economic development districts. If anyone wants to know more, you can see the screen share on the right side of the slide here, and that is EDA's Economic Development Directory. It'll always default to Alabama, but that drop-down box does include the state's possessions and territories. There you will get an inventory of state-level and regional economic development organizations, many of which have ongoing relationships with EDA. Drilling down a little further, and I'm going to be mindful of the time. These are a few featured EDA projects within that 250-mile radius. They may not go right to the bullseye of agriculture per se, but however, they do have a a broadband, advanced technology, smart cities element to them in one way, shape, or form. So here we have a project, Johnstown Redevelopment Authority's Monitoring Center, right there at 221 Central Avenue. Wonderful two-story historic building. We can see that EDA is funding a set of facility improvements that will enable the private sector to flourish. And we do have two beneficiaries there. And I think the names of those two beneficiaries speak volumes relative to this context of presentation: Telehealth Suite and One Health Solutions. Again, using broadband capacities to increase health factors. EDA is in on the effort relative to job creation. Partners in that, Johnstown Redevelopment Authority, as well as the Southern Alleghenies Planning and Development Commission, an EDA branded economic development district. Another example within that 250-mile radius is a group called Catalyst Connection, centered in Pittsburgh. EDA has funded Catalyst Connection on 2 occasions for its M2M project, basically a virtual commercialization center. This one goes a bit into agriculture per se, but relative to the manufacturing and the packaging, and how those can, products can be tracked with a level of sophisticated product packaging. Wonderful news story. You have the URL at the bottom of the page. Catalyst Connection is quite the innovator and pretty nationally renowned, worth a little bit of investigation. And then, tailing or teeing up with Robert's presentation, we will talk a bit about the rather modest broadband feasibility grant under the Economic Adjustment Assistance Program to the Seneca Nation, fiscal year 19. It paired up very nicely with the Reconnect funding opportunities afforded to Seneca Nation and its partners for the deployment of broadband. Again, implementing it. EDA was able to play a supportive role there in respect to the economic integrative theme. And I just want to take a moment here to talk about some of the identified strengths here. That enhanced broadband capacity will help or will contribute to the Seneca Nation's vision to expand tourism and recreation opportunities. Again, private investment, job creation, core tenets of EDA programming. The feasibility study, as Robert illustrated, enabled 2 USDA Reconnect grants, one of which is listed here. Again, a federal integrative approach that will hopefully help the Seneca Nation expand on its own sovereignty over the course of time. And we will also see with Tim from Treasury that, not too long before 2019, the Seneca Nation, their economic development company, did apply for and was recognized by Treasury as a community development financial institution, small business lending. So you do have that integrative package there. Obviously, the Seneca Nation and its partners have some well-heeled, well-experienced grant writers that know to seize opportunities. So again, I want to thank the colleagues and the organizers here for this opportunity to provide this 30,000-foot overview. And again, you have that, that trinity of EDA programs, funding opportunities, which are ongoing, and your connections through the EDA contact page. Thanks for the time and the attention.
Matt, thanks very much. We're coming into the home stretch. We have Tim Herwig with us next, who is with the Comptroller of the Currency. We've heard an awful lot about public funding, but a great question is, what is the role for public-private partnerships? What is the role of private banking in building out rural broadband network?
Let's just sort of leap right into it, shall we? I'm going to talk here about a project where USDA, a privately owned rural telephone cooperative called Reservation Telephone Cooperative in Parshall, North Dakota, and First International Bank and Trust, which is a bank located in Watford City in McKenzie County. So two different projects, but both intimately connected. As you can see on the map, we've got the Fort Berthold Reservation here, and then immediately to the west is Watford City. That's on the Montana border. You see the South Dakota, North Dakota border down here. And there's Bismarck and Grand Forks and Fargo, so you can sort of navigate in your mind here as we go along. The rural telephone, the Reservation Telephone Cooperative, as I said, is a privately owned, well, it's a collectively owned rural telephone cooperative that's located on the reservation, but it's not tribally owned, though tribal members, of course, work for the company, and tribal members sit on the cooperative's board of directors. So the two entities work fairly closely together. And so already we're seeing something characteristic when banks step up to finance rural broadband infrastructure or to participate in financing schemes. Therefore, is that you know, banks aren't charitable or organizations. They're bank regulators like my own, the Office of the Comptroller, the Currency, or the OCC, does not require them to do certain kinds of commercial lending necessarily. Under the Community Reinvestment Act, we encourage banks to do this kind of lending, but we can't require them to do so. There are requirements, of course, regarding residential lending involving the fair lending laws, but not in this particular case. So it's important to keep this in mind. So this is leveraging private enterprise and forming partnerships with public entities that do lend or provide grants, which we do not. And so I'm just going to step through the build out between 2010 and 2013 on the reservation that was undertaken by RTC, the cooperative, and USDA. What's interesting is that North Dakota is a really, you know, it's a big state, but everybody sort of knows each other because the population density is so light or thin. So this is really a collaboration between people who are acquainted, if not friends. Initially, what happened is the RTC received a Broadband Initiative Program grant through the American Recovery Act, and this was administered by USDA Russ, and it was awarded in March of 2010, but it wasn't funded until September of 2010. So now we're talking about North Dakota. We're talking about being close to the Canadian border. It gets wicked cold up there, and the construction period is relatively tight. It's essentially May to September. So what RTC did is that they reached out to First International Bank and Trust, which is just to the west, and they were able to receive an unsecured bridge loan of $8.85 million, and then the bank participated out $6.25 million of that to 5 community banks, other community banks in the area. First International has at this point had just over $1 billion in assets. None of these banks had branches on the reservation, interestingly enough. So this is a really different community of banks that they would go in to do a project on the reservation. A lot of times, there's race prejudice issues. I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to be retiring soon. I'm talking about people as just people that are impediments to seeking out, but also issues around lending and reservation land, trust land, fee simple land, etc. So now we've got 6 banks that are involved. The build out was completed in 2013. 99% of residents, according to the RTC, are served through fiber on the reservation, and the cost is offset in part through the Lifeline program for low-income consumers, though it's very small, really. So now let's take a look at the McKenzie County build out. This is a similar story, so I don't have to take perhaps as much time on this. So now we're looking at a time frame of 2013 to 2015, and previously we were at 2010 to 2013. So these followed each other directly. So we start out with First International Bank and Trust giving RTC a $10 million operating line of credit. And that was for fiber to the home construction across the county. Partly what was going on here is that, oh, by the way, I can't see myself. Josh, is my image okay? Am I on camera?
Well, your name is on camera.
Is my face on camera?
Was before, but what we have is you look great. You look great.
Okay. All right. So the Bakken oil fields are beginning to pick up, it's a boom and bust cycle. It's mineral extraction, and McKenzie County is in the southern end of this. And so they wanted to capitalize on workers coming into the area, and construction operations or oil extraction concerns who might be interested in developing offices in this county, but there was no fiber. And so this was partly driven by taking advantage of that economic development opportunity. Which is interesting because here we see fiber, which we all, whose praises we sing, but it's coming up against, fossil fuel production, which a lot of people have concerns over. So I think this is a really good example because I think morally and ethically it can be complicated for certain people. At any rate, this line of credit was renewed for $10 million again in 2014. And the major step that followed that was the construction of the RTC service building, in which the ring and the fiber to the home connections that connected to the ring and then connected to the middle mile connections all took place. And in addition to continuing to provide construction financing assistance. Then USDA stepped in with an infrastructure loan program, grant and loan of $24.6 million. And the bank provided another bridge loan between the award of the grant and loan and its delivery, as it were. The bank then renewed its line of credit again, at this time for $8 million, slightly smaller, as the construction, the scope of construction is winding down. The bank in 2015 consolidates $17.7 million to permanent financing, which means they've shifted from an interest-only construction loan to now P&I. So principal and interest is now required to to be paid by RTC. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that what's very interesting is that the state of North Dakota has an economic development bank called the Bank of North Dakota, and they purchased $8.85 million of the 17.7, which had been consolidated into permanent financing. In so doing, they're reinvesting $8.85 million in a financial institution which has a track record of financing economic development. And so capital persists in making those opportunities happen. These are some OCC publications that people might be interested in. One's a report on the left and a video on the right. I feature significantly in the video, so that might be one of the compelling reasons for watching it. Here's my contact information. I work in community affairs for the OCC. And what I want to say in conclusion is that it is possible to support the infrastructure build out of fiber broadband on tribal lands, but it's dependent on factors which are different when you are simply looking at grants or forgivable loans, as it were, from governmental entities. Private enterprise, the capitalist marketplace, has to be taken into account and leveraged in order to make this kind of thing happen. So thanks, everybody.